Hey everyone, this is Ian Miller, and welcome to another episode of Triple Threat Comics YouTube channel. It's now December 8th, and I have to tell you, we're actually getting close to our first year anniversary on Triple Threat Comics YouTube channel, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you to all of you who have supported us, and all of you subscribers who've always tuned in. So, with that, we have a very special guest tonight. He is a comic creator extraordinaire. He's created such characters. Some of them you probably heard about in some of the Kickstarter, campaigns. He's the creator of Black Alpha, Salem Tusk, Damian Moon, and Evelyn 11. Please welcome Tom Rasch.
Hi, Ian. It's like we're together again for the first time.
Yes, for the last time we meet for the first time for the last time.
Exactly. Yep.
Love Spaceballs.
Yeah, one of my favorites.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, before we actually start the show, Tom and I actually did speak a little bit, and we actually do have a lot in common, which I'm always pleased at. So Tom, a lot of my viewers aren't comic book readers, so why don't you very briefly discuss how you got started in comics?
Well, first of all, I've been trying to dial in this short narrative. I'm not always successful, so we'll see how it goes this time. I'll try and keep it short and sweet.
All right.
My mother, Maggie, is a fantastic artist, and my first memories of art are her drawings that when I was probably around 4 or 5. And so I would actually sit there and start copying her drawings. I was very, that's when I realized I just enjoyed doodling and drawing. So my dad, Bob, who was stationed on Guam at the time, I remember having memories of television, and I always tell people the first 3 things I remember and I instantly fell in love with were Spider-Man, Batman, and Star Trek. So between the combination of being exposed to these like genre culture, nerd culture before we even knew what that was, I was instantly like in love with these things and never looked back. And so between that and just kind of my desire to doodle and create stuff, I learned early on to like the power of the pencil and your imagination was pretty profound. Meaning, like even in grade school, like I love drawing classic scenes of something like, a couple of cars getting in an accident that are tipped over, they're on fire, the fire truck is on their way, you know what I mean? Those were things that I just was very jazzed about. And so when my dad actually got stationed back here in the States, he was stationed, like I said, in Guam. My mom bought me my first comic book, and the one that I wanted was Batman. And like I was telling you pre-show, it was the Neil Adams version. I had no idea who Neil Adams was by the way back then. But Batman had a 20-foot long cape. He looked a little more serious and grim. There was no Robin, but I was instantly on board. And so between that and then my early grade school years, we would go visit my grandmother's house, and my 2 uncles who were teenagers at the time, Larry and Leonard, they had an amazing collection of comic books that they would pull down from my grandma's attic. And then they would let me look at them, and they were all Marvel and DC stuff. So I was instantly exposed to a wide array of amazing new characters. So that really was a big milestone for me too, because there were characters like Adam Warlock, the Man Called Nova, stuff from DC, actually even pulp heroes like Doc Savage, because John Carter, Warlord of Mars, they had a run of books in the 70s. And so that was incredibly exciting for me. And especially I was into like space books, Adam Warlock and such. And I think once I realized just how many more characters were out there in the comics medium, then I was completely blown away. And so from there, it continued with me drawing, doodling, getting into more characters. And then when I was in 5th grade, there was this cartoon on. Some people may be familiar with them, but what they did was they took 5 different Marvel comics from the 60s using a lot of Jack Kirby artwork. And they actually animated them, but they animated it in a very crude style, like only an arm would move, a mouth. And of course, at first when I was watching this, I was going, what in the world is, you know what I mean? Because I was used to other little more smoother cartoons. But the lineup of those characters was Iron Man, the Submariner, Thor, Captain America, and the Hulk. And I remember that was another example of like, wow, this is amazing stuff. So right around this time too, I was still very much into Star Trek, things I'd seen on TV and movies. And then Star Wars came out in 1977. So that was about a year or so later for me. So between the medium of comics still building and my love of Star Trek, and then being introduced to Star Wars, like all of these things were starting to interlock, that I realized that I had a passion for storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And so from that point on, I kind of decided, I always tell people there's about 4 or 5 goals I've had since childhood. I wanted to be a rock star. I wanted to be a starship captain. I wanted to write and direct films. I wanted to create comic book characters. And I'm fortunate in a way, because I feel like certain people out there will have these things that they kind of realize, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And sometimes, real life gets in the way and people kind of put those on the shelf. That's actually never happened for me. And so as I got a little bit older, though, back then I was a very shy, meek art kid, art nerd. And I knew a little bit about Hollywood even then, that there's a little bit of a real cutthroat aspect to it. And so I'm like, well, if I'm going to do storytelling and I love comics so much, maybe I can draw comics, because it's kind of I tell people it's a similar visual language in some ways. You got to be a director, cinematographer, actor, editor, all of that kind of rolled into one, production designer, costume designer. And so I figured that still would be kind of really, go along with my passion, my path for storytelling. And so right around this time too, I discovered artists, by the way, because I brought up Jack Kirby, but I didn't know Jack Kirby did that work in those Marvel cartoons.
Yeah.
So my first rock star artist was John Byrne, and I started to follow him on Iron Fist. And then after that, worked my way over to, he did some Marvel team ups, but it was X-Men with him and Chris Claremont and Terry Austin inking. That was another huge, like, nuclear bomb that went off, where I'm just like, this stuff is amazing. And that's actually when I first took the initiative to buy my own comics. So a lot of times, because my uncles had the comics, like I mentioned previously, a lot of them would end on cliffhangers that they didn't have the full storyline. So that I would be bummed about that.
Yeah.
But with the X-Men run of John Byrne and Chris Claremont, I finally started buying the books. And then I religiously I would get on my bicycle, go to a local supermarket where the spinner rack was still a thing, and I would buy the X-Men every month. And I bought it for probably a few years that John Byrne was on the run. And then and that was one thing too, I was brokenhearted when he quit the book, but there were some amazing storylines that they left behind with their legacy. And then, in the very early 80s, he started working on Fantastic Four. So I followed him over there. But while this was also going on, there were other artists that I were discovering. Like I loved Mike Grell on The Warlord and Star Slayer, Dave Stevens on The Rocketeer, Art Adams, Howard Chaykin on American Flag. And that was another thing too. Around like 80, 81, there was a magazine put out by the publishers of Starlog called Comic Scene. And that was very much specific for the comic industry. So I learned even more about these awesome comics. And I was very much inspired, which still kind of is the narrative thread I follow to this day, about the independent, creator-owned comic movement. Because that was some of the beginning, was maybe the very late 70s with Richard and his wife, Wendy Peeney, on ElfQuest. There were a couple other books that were put out, some of that in the late 70s. But I felt like around 81 or 82 is when the indie movement really, really took off. Yeah. And so that was another aspect where I'm like, so we had all these classic heroes from Marvel and DC, but these comic creators were putting out their own material. And I think even then I was like realizing such a power and such a passion in bringing your own mythology to life, your own characters, their storylines, their universe. And so backing up a little bit, when I was 11, I was doodling Spider-Man swinging from a building and the Enterprise blasting some planet. But then I created this character called Black Alpha. And I'm not sure where the name came from. I have a few theories. I mean, to an 11-year-old, it just sounds cool. And I think it was probably Black Adam. And then I watched Space 1999, which had Moonbase Alpha. It sounded kind of spacey to me. And I knew that I wanted a space hero with a spaceship. The version that I created in grade school is quite a bit different than the modern one. But that was my first experience creating my own character. Started doing drawings, had these images in my head of what kind of books or what kind of storylines I wanted to do. And even back then, I always visualized it as a cartoon line, comics, apparel, merchandise, spaceship models, everything that I loved from Star Trek or Star Wars. Yeah. So as I got a little bit older and the indie movement was kicking in the early 80s, I didn't have a driver's license. I was afraid to drive. I didn't get my license till I was 20. So I walked a lot of places. And so while I walked, going back and forth to even high school, my brain, the gears were turning constantly. And one time I had an image of a large, very muscular African-American gentleman riding a woolly mammoth, like kind of inspired by Frank Frazetta style paintings. Yeah. And then I decided to take that character and go, I want to do an Indiana Jones style story, because I'm like you, we were talking previously. I followed the George Lucas path, which is space opera first, pulp adventure hero next. And the Salem part of Salem Tusk, which is his name, was, I think, partially brought about because I liked a character named Saber, who was all part of that indie movement in the early 80s. And Tusk was probably that image of him riding the woolly mammoth. And then there was a movie, Salem's Lot, that was out, in the late 80s, based on the Stephen King book. So it might have come from there. And then around this same year, I had kind of an image. I wanted to do a magic character. And I decided that I wanted to do kind of my Doctor Strange meets James Bond. So I thought I'd throw a twist on there that he's a secret agent who actually has to use incantations and spells to get out of a tight spot rather than high-tech gadgetry. And so Salem Tusk and Damian Boone were both created when I was 16, Black Alpha when I was 11. The character, by the way, Evelyn Elleven, that you see in the image there, she's one of those interesting stories because when I started doing a lot more comic convention appearances a little over 10 years ago, I wanted a sketchbook to sell, and then I wanted some of my characters on a banner I had made. So I decided I wanted a female futuristic soldier, and that was it. And she was the cover of my sketchbook that was selling. Well, she's a big part of one of my previous banners. So people would come up and go, she looks interesting. What's her story? So that was kind of reverse engineered because I came up with her, and then I started having to kind of build a story around, her appearance and stuff. And I pretty much describe her. By the way, I always have an amalgamation for all my characters. Black Alpha is Batman and Iron Man meets Star Wars. Once again, Salem Tusk is kind of a Jules Verne meets Indiana Jones, Wild Wild West with, Robert Conrad, the one that was made into second movie with Will Smith. Yeah. Damian Boone, like I said already. And sometimes in the modern market, I pitch it as Harry Potter meets James Bond. There's a lot of mythology with the sorcery for the character. And then Evelyn Elleven, I sort of pitch as Furiosa from Mad Max meets a female Jason Bourne because she has no memory of who she is. And so she's kind of on this adventure as she tries to uncover the clues of her past, trying to fight through her amnesia. And she also is protecting a family kind of in the dystopian wastelands. There's not much civilization left. And I kind of equate it to besides the two things I mentioned, a bit of the Mad Max dystopian setting. It's a bit of a Western too, because she's almost kind of like the mysterious gunfighter that shows up, and she's protecting like this mother and her two kids. She's a widow, and they're kind of on a wagon train adventure, facing threats along the way. And she's trying to help protect them when they get to one of the last surviving colonies. That's kind of the anyone who's ever watched Battlestar Galactica, they were always looking for Earth. Yeah. And in Evelyn's story, they're looking for a colony that they hope to find refuge and peace, etc. So she's kind of one of the interesting ones because she hasn't been around as long as the other ones. But that's one thing I realized too. Like I can see anything, and I'm almost able to kind of either challenge myself or I'll be immediately inspired to build a story around anything. Somebody could give me a premise, and the gears start turning once again, and I'm able to build hopefully some fairly, solid world building and mythology building around that. So,
yeah. Just looking at the images and also just to hear the description of the characters, you really have thought out a lot of your universe already. My question is, at some point, would you ever consider doing a crossover with some of these characters?
Well, actually, one of the things that I just announced, it's been a while on Facebook because I was a little conflicted about this, but I finally decided that actually they all exist in the same universe. I've been kind of building a plan how that's going to happen, and that's with every character that I have. Yeah. Because I feel like it might be overdone, but I mean, especially in the cinematic end of things with Marvel and DC, everyone wants to have a universe that they can build upon, spinoffs, etc.
Yeah.
And I decided, because originally I was against that. I'm like, no, I want them to all be their own self-contained stories. But the more I started thinking about it, I'm like, I think it would make almost better business sense in the current market to create a larger universe. That way, if I wanted to do crossovers, I'd find, or somebody does a cameo or whatever, a way to sort of kind of have maybe a person who might want to follow one title or one story might want to check out, another one. And so there's another character that you don't have the image of, the bondsman. And that's one thing that we're even discussing with that character, is how to kind of fit all of this together as like pieces of a puzzle. The bondsman, by the way, I'm very excited about. I created that character 1992 or 93, so it's my love letter to Image. And that was one thing we talked about, the independent movement of the early 80s. Well, for me in the early 90s, when Image became a thing, that was like the apex of everything. And I still very much admire what those guys have done then, what they continue to do. And so my bondsman character is kind of like very much inspired by like the books that I loved back then, like Spawn and Pitt, those kinds of things. And so when we launched the campaign for that one, it's set in the 90s. So it's sort of a nostalgia piece. It's a love letter to the 90s, kind of like how Stranger Things has been a love letter to the 80s. So we're going to do it. We're going to set, I'm really excited to kind of, in a way, sort of go back to that art style, which I still love, by the way. The awesome, the Image, awesome, just over the top rendering and guns and, everything. And yeah, so that one's going to be a fun one too. But we're like I said, we're setting the story in the 90s when I created the character, but we're going to give a little bit of it, a little more modern sensibility as far as the layered storytelling, the characterization goes. But I do tell people it can be a blessing and a curse to have such a fertile imagination, because I have so many characters and even others that I haven't even put in the public eye yet. They're all fighting for space in my head sometimes. I feel like I'm the stenographer. And I'm trying to like really honor all of their voices and what they want to say. And sometimes it's like whack-a-mole. I have to kind of have a few of them go back in the hole there a little bit, because it can be, a little overwhelming and a little overstimulating.
Yeah, this is another thing I actually tell people who are actually aspiring to be creators. I would say, look, if you have several ideas, write them out. But if you have a couple of strong ones that you feel very strong about, that you think could actually have, an audience, focus on those. The other ones could wait.
Yeah, and I think sometimes maybe there's an urgency when you're so passionate that you're like, I got to do this, because you feel like, you're hoping you have enough time. But I'm still hopeful. Real quick, I forgot to mention the awesome image that you pulled up is done by Robert Nix, is the artist. I commissioned him to do those because I get tired of seeing my own artwork after a while. And so I love seeing other people's take on my characters. It kind of gets me re-energized. And there is a purpose, by the way. He's got a few more coming that I'm having him do. It's part of kind of a new marketing thing that I plan on doing in the next year or so with these characters. I'm going to do a little bit of animation with some of that stuff too. But the interesting thing, I guess, that I didn't get to mention is in the last 10 years, maybe 11 now, like I decided I was pretty heavily involved immediately on Facebook and social media sites, mainly Facebook. And people would come to me and ask about comics. And, because I drew for Marvel at one time, that probably forgot to mention that. And after working at Marvel, I worked on Punisher 2099. I ended up getting into doing concept art for video games and film projects. And so that was my bread and butter for many years. I had two friends who also did comics. Said, come over to video games. You make a lot more money. You're a salaried employee and you don't have to do like the really long hours most of the time. So that was pretty appealing to me, but decided to take a break from that too after a while. And then when people asked would I go back to drawing comics, I was like, if I'm going to do comics, I would actually rather just do my characters. If I'm going to put the time and the effort in, and still there's that like zing for me, like that internal bliss of just the excitement of seeing that world brought to life. I tell people, I have my number one priority is my daughter, who I love, my actual child, and then I have all these brain children. And you do feel like a proud parent when you you give birth to them and you start to see them kind of they're building a life of their own that you're helping nurture along. And to me, it's still a feeling like that can never be replaced. Because sometimes I do make the joke, and it is only semi-joke. Like if somebody came to me and they said, we will give you millions of dollars to do your own Star Trek story or Star Wars, it would be really hard to turn that down. I mean, there's stories that I love of other characters that I wish I could do my take on. but ultimately I'll still get more fulfillment from bringing my own characters to life. So, with all that being said, Black Alpha, my 11-year-old creation was published in USA Today. I had merchandise I created from it on The Big Bang Theory for years.
Yeah, I see that all the time. Every time I watch a episode, I just get excited.
And then it was optioned a few times for TV, cartoon, film development. And the major 6 or 7 characters I have out in the public eye on Facebook, each one of them has had interest from Hollywood. Like, a couple of times we were going to have a film based on Salem Tusk, which right now has kind of been shelved for the moment. Just trying to figure out strategy, how to move all these forward. But Black Alpha was optioned. Salem Tusk was, developed. The Bondsman was going to be developed by director Max Turchi as a film. I'm currently talking to a producer right now, and this is the second or third time about Evelyn, Elleven, about making a film of that. So it's been an interesting, sometimes rough learning curve, though, because when this is new, and especially if I've wanted this most of my life, you get sort of seduced by the potential glamour of like, oh, my thing is going to be a movie or TV show. And then I've had to learn the hard way. And there's tons of people out, famous people, that when you see an announcement, like in some media outlet for Hollywood, that they're going to develop this thing, maybe 5 or 10% of them actually get made. And there's a number of reasons for that. I think that the person who comes to the table with interest, they have the desire, but then they have to get all the moving parts in place. And sometimes that includes, the funding and the financing and other things. And sometimes those don't click all the way. So I've had to learn that the hard way. And the last few years, thanks to my partners at WTF Comics, and specifically John Jones and Jack, they came to me a few years ago asking if they could help get Black Alpha to a wider base. And so they actually build the crowdfunders, and that's kind of what their model is crowdfunding their original books. It's all creator owned. It's all original books, which is kind of the outfit I really want to be a part of, obviously.
Yeah.
And to kind of really focus back on comics and how awesome comics are. I in a way, I sort of had to give a re-education to myself about this is still an amazing storytelling medium. I think that because we've had so much things build, especially over the last 10, 15, 20 years of films and cartoons of like, the X-Men and other Deadpool. So many comic projects have been turned into films that, that seems very exciting. But, I feel like there's definitely a bit of I'm trying to think of the correct term. There's an advantage, I guess, to like your comics because you have more of a singular vision.
Yeah.
You can tell, especially with your own characters, you can tell any kind of story you want. When you're doing something like a film or TV show, you're only a very small part of the cog in that machine, even as the creator, because there's so many other people. If they've invested money, they're going to want to see versions of it. In fact, I have a great quote from Mike Mignola, who's the creator of Hellboy, when they've asked about his thoughts on especially the Guillermo del Toro Hellboy movies. Yeah. He said, that's his character. Mine is the one that's in the comics and the graphic novels. And I think there's a bit of a creative therapy in that for a creator where you're going, even if somebody comes along and turns your thing into a film, there's always going to be adjustments. And that's where I'll remind myself, my comic is my version. That's the purest version of my character and characters in these stories. And if a film gets made, that's kind of their version. I might be a bit of a collaborator or the beginning stages of the creation process, but I've learned to kind of separate it that way. But with that being said, I do pride myself in being a very organic creator because since I've been doing this kind of Hollywood bit for about 10 years now, I'm pretty organic when it comes to the creative process and the partnership. And so I'm not knocking other comic creators that have a very singular vision, but for me, I use kind of the humorous analogy that if a producer wanted to do one of my characters, I'm not going to be bent out of shape that her hair is not purple anymore. Like there are comic creators out there that are like, her hair needs to stay purple. That's integral to the character. I'm not that guy because I realize, I guess, the reality of the transmedia, the multi-platform adaptation process of it. So if anyone out there watching, if you're ever looking for someone to make a movie or comic, I'm your guy because I will not, get caught up in those small details that people have ruined deals, by the way, for doing that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely hear stories like that, and many people forget, especially a lot of viewers, it is very common that, some things do do get talked about. They do reach a starting point, but then at some point, the rug just comes, gets pulled out from under you. So I really have to commend you to saying that when you say your comics, that's your version of it. That's the appropriate term right there. Your version.
Well, and usually when you're trying to strike a deal in these particular moments, I do try and be mindful of when looking over the contracts for a TV and movie adaptation. Is that I have the rights on the comics,
Yeah.
which means I get to tell them the way that I want to tell them, and hopefully they're not too confusing if anything is ever made into something else.
Mm.
But yeah, so I mean, it's definitely a journey. It's not over with. I guess I'm appreciative, even if nothing has fully come out of my characters. It's nice to know there's always interest out there in 10 years, and especially
Yeah.
because I have a number of characters. It's not just one and then one and done, and that, you don't ever hear about anything again. And so that's my hope with my characters, is that that they can cover, I guess, enough bases that, and that's one thing too. People have asked me, they're like, the kind of material that you do, especially say with something like Black Alpha, when I started getting that out in the public eye a decade ago, I had a number of families come over to my table, and they had questions like, well, could my kid read this? And I'm like, yeah, I tend to create material that is like what I grew up with. I could watch Star Trek and Star Wars with my mom and dad. I might have a couple other titles that might be slightly more on the mature side because it represents the tone of the story, but I'm very careful because I mean, I want, to me, in a way, in a business move, it also should be smart if you make it 4-quadrant, which translates to mean like your stuff should be appealing to young kids and grandparents and everything in between. You should have a wider base of potential success because everyone can go see it, and then people can possibly get the merchandise, et cetera. I mean, I've seen Marvel obviously do that with the Marvel films.
Yeah.
For so many years that they were able to really appeal to just about any of the movie going audience, which to me is a very shrewd and smart business move. But the one thing too, like that was one of the I forgot to mention earlier. So when I started getting my material out in the public eye about a decade ago and moving away from like Marvel and DC stuff, because I would do prints, there was a bit of a vulnerability there because you're like going, well, now I'm sort of diving into the pool and I'm going to put my material out there. And you're hoping first of all, there's any interest, period. Right. And then, so what I did was I took some notions of things I grew up reading most of my life about, like how Star Wars was marketed before the movie came out. I've applied that quite a bit to Black Alpha. I had t-shirts ready, posters. I had a trailer playing, merchandise like the action figures, the maquette, the ship. They were all there to bring people over to the table, to say, oh, what is this? Because I figure if you can kind of make it look like it's almost a real thing in the multi-platform space, hopefully that will make people sit up and take notice, like, oh, is this already a TV show? This or that, And then, of course, it's another marketing opportunity to sell the books, to get people into the stories, so.
Yeah, I also learned that myself. Not going into the toys or the models, which, by the way, I had to buy one of those models. They look spectacular.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, but I have also printed T-shirts myself, and I put them on my table, and people do show an interest when you see merchandise like that. So yeah, there is a smart economical reasoning behind this. The more you have on your table, the more attraction it's gonna reach.
Well, and I think some people, like in this really interesting age we live in, where it's kind of a do-it-yourself method of a lot of comic creators are able to come forth and tell their stories. They don't have to wait for some big publisher or publisher to sign them up. I think it's some people that aren't aware of whatever somebody, whatever they're shilling, I guess, at their convention table. People feel it's exciting because it's ground floor opportunity. So some of them feel like if this ever blows up someday, I met that guy that created that, or I'm talking any comic creator in the indie scene. That's what I think is exciting about it. But there's still that thrill of me, like even people being interested in what you're doing. There's an exchange, a relationship that you build with an audience. Like that they you appreciate that they want to check out your material. They become invested in the stories. And I always say one of my legacies I hope to leave behind, first and foremost, I want to be a good dad to my daughter, and I want to inspire her that dad continued through all the years to continue working towards his dreams, but also to pass the thread of how I grew up, like we described earlier, what inspired me to be creative and
Yeah.
comics that I loved, and my mom buying me comics or my uncle's comics that they already owned. I want to be able to pass that kind of that baton to the next generation of storytellers, hoping that, they're inspired just like, because all my heroes, there are some fictional ones, but most of my heroes through my whole life have been like the Stan Lees and the Gene Roddenberrys and the George Lucases of the world, still are to this day.
Yeah.
Tolkien, Frank Herbert, anyone who spent so much time just crafting these amazing universes that people become very invested in. And that's one thing too I've learned, like for me, like Black Alpha especially, I sort of pitch it as the comic book equivalent of stuff like Tolkien or Frank Herbert, because it's a multi-layered, I have alien alphabets that I've created. I have different sayings that the characters have, as or a cultural reference, or there, I have a star maps that I made up that my story initially only takes place in a very small portion of that star map. But then when characters reference things, it gives a hint of a much larger universe. And I feel like that's well, even Star Wars and Star Trek have done that. Like, I think as a little kid, without even realizing it, especially with Star Trek being the first one, there was all this stuff that the characters would say. There would be some reference points. I knew that there were 12 other starships like Kirk's.
Yeah.
And I had the theater in my mind to fill in all that other stuff that you're like, oh, wouldn't it be cool? I mean, we live in an age now where obviously you can do any Star Trek, any ship, any crew. But back then, that wasn't a reality. And so I've learned to appreciate the value of exposition too. And I tell people, because we live in an age where people want to see everything, especially when it comes to film budget, but you can actually do creative choices, just like Star Wars did with the first film, when Obi-Wan Kenobi tells Luke about the history of the Jedi Knights and the Force, his father dying at the hands of Darth Vader. That was the power of exposition. You didn't see any of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm
go ahead. Sorry. No. Go ahead. Here we go.
Yeah. No, it also served the story better. It made the story better that you didn't show it.
Well, I feel like, like I said, we live in an age now where some people, I think, have been spoiled that you have to show these huge VFX set pieces and battles and stuff. And I know for me, like even in Black Alpha, we have a saying, which is, I'd like to print it on a t-shirt. It would be my version of "May the Force be with you" or "Live long and prosper." See, I have one of those. There's a couple of sayings that the characters use in the story that's only conducive to them. And if it's said enough, then the reader eventually will realize, oh, okay, that's what like space pirates say. It's one of their sayings or whatever. I mean, all of these things, like I said, the minutia that I've been inspired by, I just tell people I take what I love as a fan, I apply it to my own creator projects and give it my fresh coat of paint. So if I grew up loving Star Trek and Star Wars, especially with stuff like spaceships, I have different classes of ships in Black Alpha. I have schematics. I have deck plans of the ship. I have history of this, you know what I mean? All these things that I love. And that's just one aspect of me as a fan that I've loved, and then, the other aspects of like how Starfleet worked or the Jedi Knights, and I've been inspired by that to sort of add those layers, because in this day and age too, I think it's very important to make your IP or intellectual property the franchise star, which for me personally means like, it's not just about one singular character. If you want to do that kind of book, sure, that's fine. That's great. But in my case, I like to build something that has franchisability. So it can have spinoffs that are set in the future, set in the past. You can do novels, you know what I mean? Board games, any of that stuff. In fact, for a while, we were developing a Black Alpha board game that also got derailed, but we were going to actually do something that was set with a totally different set of characters that's referencing the main storyline that's currently unfolding in the comic book. In the board game, they have their own mission that's going on in the same timeline. But I wanted to sort of whiten the aspect of how big this universe is by having their story be completely separate from the main characters in the Black Alpha comic. And I still do hope to do that at some point, but I'm just saying those are an example. And I tend to think of my things, like I said earlier, games, video games, books, toys, all of it. I think that if you make your property the franchisable star, that in my case I enjoy, then that will hopefully make it easier for you to build other aspects of that universe to turn into spin-off or ancillary materials.
No, I agree. I think everyone's had that thought. I certainly have had that thought, saying, okay, what if my characters, had this much merch, had video games and, and yeah, I think it's a great goal to have, just to have that thought, even if it doesn't happen, you can at least imagine in your mind saying, okay, this is what I think it would look like, you know, even if it doesn't happen in reality. But yeah, that's definitely a goal to have, especially the board game. I think you should definitely revisit that at some point. Maybe even make it part of a Kickstarter campaign. You know, where you're selling the book, but you also got this game as well.
Well, the guy that was designing it, him and I still keep in touch, but I mean, he's also been wanting to get his own kind of, well, more of a card game, I guess,
Yeah,
um, off the ground. And he came up with a system for, for the Black Alpha universe. We're hoping to revisit it at some point, but, like rest of us, real life gets in the way and you got to
yeah,
really juggle your priorities. But I will say this about the board game. So Black Alpha, the main character is Batman and Iron Man meets Star Wars. Um, this one would be the board game would be a little more my equivalent to Star Trek because it's a small crew on a ship.
yeah,
They're on a mission, and each one of them has a color coded uniform. It's a very small crew, but it's a very a couple of alien species, and so that would be my love letter to Star Trek in the Black Alpha universe. By like I said, and I've had the ship designed for quite a long time. It's actually in the lineup of ships that I sometimes spotlight. But yeah, I mean, I would love. In fact, I have a character named Dr. Rook, and
mhm,
he's the official scientist for the mission. And he's my Spock or Dr. Lazarus from Galaxy Quest. And then I have another character, which he's completely covered head to toe in armor, but he's basically the security chief and the chief medic. So he can
wow,
kick butt when he needs to, and then he can also heal when he needs to, and has a very soft bedside manner. But when need be, he lays waste to the opponents or anyone that's threatening the crew. So he's a very interesting character that I'd like to explore too.
yeah,
Like I said, too many characters, so little time.
yeah. That's a mixture of Chekhov and Bones.
Well, and even a little bit of Worf. I thought, like,
Yeah,
what if you
yeah,
combine Worf with, Dr. McCoy or whatever the case is? So,
mhm,
and then the captain, of course, he's kind of your classic Kirk archetype, kind of a young
yeah,
officer trying to prove himself. All these storytelling dynamics can go a number of directions, but that would all be within that game. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like, and so I hope we can explore that at some point. But because I did have a couple of friends saying, well, it might be confusing if people are just kind of learning about the storyline in the comic, but then I said, I don't think so. I said, if it's built properly,
yeah,
like I said, especially in components of the game, they reference some of the events that, like I said, are unfolding in the main storyline for Black Alpha. You know,
yeah.
I think Into the Fringe, I think is what we called. That was the working title. It's got
Mhm.
Black Alpha as the title, but then Into the Fringe, and I've done. If people ever want to check it out on Facebook, I know somewhere in there I've got designs of the characters, model sheets from the board game too.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that I appreciate being an illustrator is that I can spend the time developing, doing concept art for my characters and the ships and the vehicles, and that stuff rocks my world. I mean, since I was a kid, I've been into like behind the scenes books or the making of books,
Yeah.
and I would religiously read those in grade school, junior high school, because I loved knowing how they came about, problem solving for these things that we all fall in love with when they hit the TV screen or the movie theaters.
Yeah. I still collect them today.
Oh yeah, they're awesome. Yeah. And that's one thing that I mentioned too. Like even with Black Alpha being a comic and my hopes of it possibly being something else, I still put as much development, 2 years, 2 to 3 years, designing the characters, designing the ships and everything. I gave it the same amount, I guess, of quality and TLC as if I was doing it like I've done for video games professionally or film projects.
Well, it actually is pretty handy that you actually did have knowledge of how to do that, especially when it comes to in terms of, as you said, designing your own characters and expanding your own worlds. So having that background, being a video game concept artist, working with some Hollywood productions, yeah, that helps.
Yeah, and I mean that's something I wanted to do anyway for years. I did it when I was younger. My earlier version of like I was always um, just yeah, even in my teens, I was always going, well, if I'm going to have this character, I'm going to do a few different versions of what he may look like. So I mean, I've been jazzed about that literally for decades now, and it's
Yeah,
not going to go away. So I love doing it.
yeah, and nor should you. I do have a question though. When you do write out your scripts, do you have the tendency of actually saying the dialogue out loud as you're writing them to make it sound natural?
Well, so here's the thing, and I've been, sometimes I think people assume I'm a one-man show. I come up with the characters, the general plot, um, the tone, but I'm not a great writer. I'm first to admit that. I know where my strengths and weaknesses are. So all of my comics, my for TV and film is all written by somebody. It's all written by screenwriters or writers, period.
Okay.
And so what I also enjoy about that, I'll have meetings with my writers and I'm like, well, this is kind of the general direction, but I sort of give them some free reign too, to kind of really, unless I feel like it's completely out of bounds, like a character killing somebody. And I'm like, this character
Yeah.
doesn't do that. But overall, I let them kind of have free reign. So in a way, I get to be this weird kind of unique viewpoint of an audience member, because I'm like, these are my characters. This is kind of what I've envisioned. This is what I think about their personalities, their histories, but also the direction of the story. And when I get to see the writer's scripts, I'm like, oh man, no way, this is awesome. Like, I never considered this. And sometimes the personalities and voices that they sort of build upon, I'm blown away by. I mean, we're doing my writer, Adam Bulk, who's been working on the Black Alpha comic. He did part of issue 1, or kind of went back and maybe redid some stuff. He did issue 2. I just started reading his issue 3 script a couple months ago.
Yeah.
And it's awesome. I mean, right away, I'm also seeing the movie. So, and all the writers I work with, I get so excited to read the scripts. And so there is a very interesting, like I said, aspect of like that collaboration of it's bringing something to even a fuller life than maybe if I was. I mean, trust me, there's a part of me that wished I was a one-man show.
Mhm.
Some of my favorite comic creators are both, the Frank Millers of the world, illustrators and writers. But, I tell people my writing is rich with cliche. I've seen too many movies and read too many comic books. So whatever I have attempted writing, it feels like a bad film. So that's why I'm like, I'm going to step out of the way and let the writers who have more talent at it than I do their thing. So
No, no, I completely understand that. No, but I actually like the fact that you trust these people enough, with the characters, and obviously you direct them saying, okay, this is how what this character should go, this is how that character should go, and they're able to figure out, but also come up with very interesting, unique storylines. So that's exciting.
well, I had to tell like one of the feature film scripts for Black Alpha. I had to tell the writer that Trandon Antares is that's the
Yeah.
I guess alter ego of the character. By the way, I'm going to get to that in a minute. I have
Mhm.
a little funny story. But he had a sequence in his film script that Trandon was trying to get information from somebody because he's on a quest to find out the information of he thinks who's responsible for the death of his father and brother, and he ends up killing the guy after getting the information. I said no. I said he is not a killer. He might have a cynical chip on his shoulder. He's like a combination of Bruce Wayne and Peter Parker, and also Han Solo and Luke Skywalker. I said he maybe have a bit of an attitude at the beginning of his story, but he's definitely not a killer. He doesn't believe in that. So I had him change that. But by the way, so since I came up with the name Black Alpha when I was a kid, and I
Mhm.
couldn't figure out quite how to work it into the modern version, because I didn't want them to be like the Green Lanterns or the Nova Corps, where they're all known as the Black Alphas.
Yeah.
So I have a little funny twist that the previous, I call them pilots.
Mhm.
Trying to figure out how to say this too with maybe a little bit more of the premise. But so in my story, like I said, being inspired by Star Wars, there's the Mighty Guardsmen is what they're known as. They are Black Alpha's version of the Jedi Knights and the Nova Corps and the Green Lanterns,
Yeah.
etc. But they and like Battlestar Galactica, they are aware of Earth. They live in a different star system. They call us their Terran cousins, their Earth cousins.
Mhm.
So there's one particular character who's actually a fanboy of Earth. He's into superhero mythology, and so he himself took the name Black Alpha for his particular guardsman because he thought it sounded like a superhero.
Yeah.
So the rest of them are not known as Black Alphas. I mean, they're probably just known by their regular name. And so I decided to have this fun little kind of Easter egg backstory that I'm like, this previous pilot who had the suit and ship before Trandon, our current Black Alpha, has it. He discovers those. He makes the previous pilot will make references about the sun god from a distant star, and the bug-like young man, you know what I mean, who has special abilities, or the aristocratic creature of the night.
Yeah.
He's basically referring to Batman, Spider-Man, and Superman, but
Mhm.
we don't just come out and say it in the stories. And so that's why I thought it would be fun that because Trandon, the current Black Alpha, since he can't think of anything better, he just goes along with that identity too.
Yeah.
you know. So there's a little bit of backstory with that, because another fun thing is that when people have asked me about that name, I'm like, for many years I was embarrassed of it. I couldn't come up with anything better. I created it as a kid, obviously, but because I've been saying it for so long, it just kind of sticks now, right? So I
Yeah.
figured I've had fun with it, like sort of the childhood glee of why that name is chosen, and apply it to one of the characters in the backstory. Because one of my buddies too told me, he goes, well, if you really sit there and think about it, the things that we know and love, just think about those, like Batman. He goes, that kind of sounds dumb if you really think about it. Batman. Or he said, even Star Wars. So he said, you just got to get used to saying them, and then it won't sound as silly. So he
Yeah.
kind of convinced me, now that I've already branded it what it is. So that's why I've stuck with it. But, sort of getting back on track. Well, actually, I think I got on track. I forgot my point. But see, that's the thing with the story building again, is that, like, I've got all these characters, and I'm really thrilled to kind of bring a little bit of my personality into them, because Tranded, the lead character in Black Alpha, there's a bit of a allegory for my own story. We came from very humble origins. My parents didn't have a lot of money. He comes from a poverty-stricken section of the star system he's from. These guardsmen were the closest thing in their reality that you can become a real-life superhero, because these cell suits are augmenting suits. They have an energy signature, biosignature, mental signatures that they become augmenting suits for the guardsmen. And the notion is I say that the guardsmen are like the United States Marine Corps combined with the monks of the Shaolin Monastery. There's a lot of dedication and mental discipline they have, because the guardsman program in their universe was created to level the playing field, because they live in a reality where superpowered aliens threats are a reality, and they are like us. They don't have any special abilities. So they created this guardsman program to level the playing field, but they didn't want a bunch of corrupt individuals coming in, getting on these power suits and by a flip of the switch. So they wanted to attract people of certain character, and also just, like I said, that they have to work to get these suits to operate.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting aspect for Tran and the younger character, because he sort of becomes a guardsman, not in the way that he anticipated, in a roundabout way, because we go from his story through flashbacks. He's a very young, innocent boy during his teens. He'd already lost his mother after his younger brother was born. So eventually his colony gets destroyed. His dad and his brother get killed. He has survivor's guilt and bitterness, because he was 14 at the time. He was goofing around with his friends. He was supposed to be watching his brother, and he feels a certain responsibility. Had he been there, maybe he could do something. And that's where we come in his story. Is he's at this point now, he's in his late teens. So there's going to be a bit of a Peter Parker, like he has these special abilities in the sense from the cell suit, which stands for Cyber Enhanced Link. That's the CEL. He doesn't go out and do heroic things with it, with this gift, like Peter Parker.
Yeah.
And also he's like Peter Parker because, he grew up on the poor side of town, basically. So I wanted to create a very, your neighbor, basically, a very relatable character. But watching someone early on sort of become the seasoned hero that, they'll become someday, like I said, and that's really his allegory, is that, or his journey is about taking your young goals, like I have, and learning to morph and organically adapt to those. And you become what you wanted since you were a child, but maybe not quite in the way that you anticipated. That's pretty much the main theme of the story, his story anyway. So,
Yeah.
See, I'm totally nerding out. I can hear my 11-year-old voice going, well, you see, the 12 systems of Caradia, and there's these guardsmen, so I mean, I still hear my voice when I get excited talking about this stuff.
Yeah, I have it too. Especially when I'm talking. In fact, earlier, when we were talking before we start recording, yeah, I was hearing that voice myself, explaining, my character and all that. So I totally understand. I think every creator has that voice in their heads.
Well, and the one thing too is that, as I was building this current version of the story, which is probably more closer to 15 years now, I knew consciously I wanted all those elements in there, things that I've loved. And so unlike the Green Lanterns or even the Nova Corps,
Yeah.
I know they've dabbled in this a little bit, but I don't want my characters with their power suits flying around like superheroes. Since they're an augmenting suit, they do everything we can do. You can run a little bit faster, you're a little bit stronger, you're more agile. And then the cyber part of the suit is that they have these helmets, and that's where you get most of your like a HUD readout, like Iron Man's helmet, where
Yeah.
can give you all this information. but they don't fly. So if they need to rappel down from a spaceship, they got these morphing glider wings that they can rappel down to the ground. So they're not flying; they're basically gliding. But I also knew, because they go on a lot of deep space missions, this is where I wanted that Star Wars, Star Trek. I wanted a Millennium Falcon. I wanted the Starship Enterprise. So that's why I was very adamant that these guardsmen, even if they have these powered suits, it's like the military. You end up taking a very specific craft on your mission, or a larger craft for like a number of soldiers and troops.
Yeah.
But I wanted that's where I wanted like a ship, a very specific, and the ship is, I tell people scale wise, it's not much bigger than a Millennium Falcon. Partially because I wanted something with a similar size and attitude as the Falcon. And it serves a purpose in the story. I mean, he doesn't have to have a big ship because there's not a crew that requires that. His ship that Trandon drives around, that he got from the previous pilot, is about this. It's 2 decks. It's about the size of an apartment. It's kind of his home base. And so when we released the model kit in the last couple of months, the people that buy it, I actually did a source guide tech manual. So for people that are brand new to the ship, it gives a lot of history about the ship. I get to nerd out and do all these specifications about how fast it goes, how large it is, like I said, the deck plans, and also just why the ship kind of is its own character, really, like the Millennium. Because I said I'm also a big fan of like anything that we've grown up with, the Back to the Future DeLorean time machine, cop show cars, anything that or the Batmobile, right? Anything that has the hot ride for the characters becomes a character in its own right. Yeah. And I think it's also another great marketing tool, because I remember as a young kid, my dad got me my first Enterprise model. I loved it. My parents got me an actual Batmobile scooter that I could ride around on, like a wagon modeled after the Adam West Batmobile. And so right away I was on board with that kind of stuff too.
If I'm speechless, I just admire. It's just admiration.
Well, I'm speechless. I also appreciate your patience in hearing me just totally like nerd out. No, go on these tangents.
No, you don't understand. I get a thrill, about talking to other people about this stuff. I get a thrill. So believe me.
And I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, I can tell you and I, just having our first conversation, we're clicking, dude. Very similar personality. Besides, like I said, our appearance.
Yeah, exactly.
It looks like it could be cousins or whatever right now. Talk about the beard again.
Well, if we ever end up at a convention together, we need to have a picture together.
Yeah, separated at birth, one of those kind of things. So
yes. Yeah. Okay, I think that's gonna be it for this episode. Tom, thank you very much for coming on.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I very much enjoyed this. Oh, before we do that, I didn't know if you wanted me to mention where people can find
yes,
what I'm doing.
Of course.
So I probably 98% of what I promote is always on Facebook. I do have an Instagram account. Somebody else, actually, Jack, runs that for me, my partner, WTF Comics. Okay. Black Alpha has a Twitter page, but I've never really done that too much because I don't do it as myself. I do it as a character, and occasionally we'll link some announcements on projects with it. But mainly Facebook is the go-to. It's under Tom Rasch. Normally there's a picture of my daughter and me because I'm a proud papa. Usually in my profile, but you'll see probably instantly like all of my nerd love. I tell people my Facebook page is set up for celebrating the awesomeness of nerd culture. And so occasionally I'll share announcements of films I'm excited about, like the Godzilla movie that just came out. But also it's mainly to kind of promote my projects and share pictures of my daughter as a proud dad. And the reason I mainly have stuck with Facebook is that immediate, like you and I, you're able to have that immediate exchange. Yeah, build relationships, quite honestly, you know. So I would say, I think under the Instagram, I think it's just under Trash 65. So that would be TRASCH 65. The Instagram, I think, is the username, and then, like I said, Tom Rasch on Facebook.
By the way, how old is your daughter now?
5.
Wow, she's growing up quite big.
Yeah, I'm an unusually old father, so it's going by too fast. And then I also think about in 10 years, when she's 15 going on 16, I'm going to be closing in on 70 years old. So that seems unreal.
Yeah, and who knows? She might be going into the family business. You never know.
Well, she loves to draw and paint, and she loves to dress up as characters. So I'm hoping.
Yeah, fingers crossed, man.
Well,
Well,
and real quick, sorry, before I get off, I will share
sure.
one emotional moment. So about 2 or 3 years ago,
Mhm.
she would walk by me on my laptop. I almost got choked up thinking about this, but she's loved Marvel and DC and of course the Disney princesses. But she walked by my screen one day and I had my 7 characters of usually my cover photo, and
Yeah.
she pointed at them and she goes, "Superheroes." Not thinking about whether or not Dad had created these. And then the Evelyn 11 character last year, she told me, she goes, "Dad, I want to be her for Halloween." So it's hard not to get choked up about that. Just thinking about she doesn't even realize that Dad comes up with this stuff, you know?
I love that.
Yeah. So that's a big win for me as a father, you know, that I can share that stuff with her the older she gets.
Yeah. I know. That's exciting. And hopefully I have a experience like that when I get older and I have kids of my own. We'll see. But Tom, again, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you, Ian. Like I said, I very much enjoyed this. I look forward to doing it again sometime.
Yes, and when you do actually have a Kickstarter for your second issue of Black Alpha, come back. I can help you promote it.
I would appreciate that. So yes, we'll do.
Okay. Well, that's it for us at Triple Threat Comics. I'm Ian Miller. Have a good night, folks.